Welcome. Hello. I would just like to point out to the people in the room, this is an open group. We would welcome any of you who are sitting in the back there to come and join us at the table. Anyone who would like to participate is welcome to do so. We have the microphone set up largely because we have a webinar running. So for those on the webinar who are listening over the phone or online, the microphones are there so they can actually hear us. So with that in mind, if you would like to say something, please feel free to come to the table. We do have a handheld microphone for those in the back, but we would certainly welcome you to come to the table. And then also for those on the webinar, we would just ask that you, for those in the room, for the benefit of those on the webinar, we would just ask that you state your name before you make your comments throughout the meeting. So this is a meeting of the Management Plans Work Group. We're here focusing on the 5th management plans and particularly on the agricultural sector today. So thank you for being here. Welcome. We appreciate all of you being here and taking the time to work with us today. So my name is Natalie Mast. I am the program manager working on the management plans here at ADWR. Excuse me, we have a few other ADWR staff here today that I'll just take a quick minute to introduce. Next to me is Carol Ward. She is the Deputy Assistant Director for Water Planning and Permitting here at ADWR. So we're glad to have her help here today. Next to her, we have Saba Asafa, who is our agricultural planner. So for those of you in the regulated community, if you're submitting your annual reports, Saba's your person. And next to her is Kyle Miller, who is the data and planning manager in our active management areas. I also have some staff here helping out with the webinar and helping out with taking notes and that kind of thing. So McKenna Welsh is in the back running our webinar, doing a great job. So thank you to her. And we also have additional management plan staff here. In the back also is Maggie Martin. And on the side here, we have Amanda Long-Rodriguez. So lots of good ADWR support here today. Thank you again all for being here. I would like to point out quickly that we have been trying to add a little bit more detail to our agendas to allow all of you to be a little bit more prepared. We publish these online about a week ahead of each meeting, and then we also send a link to these out with the reminder email that goes out ahead of each meeting. So just a heads up that we are working to add a little bit more detail to those. Today, our meeting is focusing on what are we doing next? So this meeting is largely going to be focusing on concepts that we have already heard related to the agricultural conservation programs for the 5th management plan. So some potential changes coming under those programs for the 5th management plan. So I think there's some interesting ideas here, and I'm excited to hear a little bit more from you all. So just to recap a little bit, just so we can kind of touch on where we are for those of you who may not have been to all of the meetings. I know there's a lot of them. We are kind of on the bottom half of this slide here. We're working through the 5th management plan, the development and research required for the development of the 5th management plan. We have a concurrent process going on to finalize these remaining 4th management plans, Phoenix, Pinal, and Santa Cruz. But today here for this group, we are focusing on the 5th management plan. We are going to continue the work under the subgroup, under the full work group, throughout the remainder of 2020, throughout the remainder of this year, with the intent to draft those 5th management plans in 2021 and work to adopt those 5th management plans in 2022, meaning that those plans, those conservation programs would become effective in 2025. So that's a lot of detail, but that's at least a general idea of kind of where we're at in this process. We're still kind of at the beginning stages of developing the 5th management plan. So this particular group is the stakeholder forum for those fifth management plans, kind of with a few goals in mind for the group. We wanted to assess the existing conservation programs and then use that assessment to work to update conservation strategies and think about developing new conservation strategies. So kind of translating those larger group goals into goals for this this particular group. We used the last couple meetings to kind of work through some of that data analysis, and today we're kind of going to be moving on into the program conceptual phase. So today we're going to be talking about, as I mentioned before, some concepts for those fifth management plans and how do we respond to that data analysis that we did previously. So we've had two meetings of this particular subgroup. The first meeting was kind of an overview of the two main programs that we have in the agricultural program. The two main programs we have available for agricultural conservation programs. And we also kind of talked about what types of analyses we might want to do and what data we had available. In the second meeting, we focused in a little bit more on some of that data and talked specifically about the agricultural BMPs, but kind of the takeaway message from at least the data portion of that meeting was that no matter how we've looked at this data, we're not seeing equivalency between the base program and the BMP program. So part of what we're going to be talking about today is ADWR's proposal for how we are going to be responding to that difference in the two programs.
If I may, Scott Riggins, agricultural groundwater pumper and member of the Pinal GUAC. I believe that to state at this meeting that there is an agreement that data shows that the BMP program is not achieving equivalency to the base program is an absolute falsehood. The regulated community doesn't agree with that concept ever and never has. And indeed, when the BMP program was put into place during the third management plan, there was the absolute understanding that some farms using more water were already happening through flex credit purchases. The very nature of irrigated farms is that those farms that have received the most conservation work and become the most efficient, they tend to use water over what their base program water duty was that was established in 1980 to 1985 because of the improvements that they have put on to those farms. As they put those farms on, or put those improvements on, then over the years, those farms found that they bought flex credits and bought flex credits and bought flex credits. The department's data that states that BMP farms use more water than base program farms, if the BMP was not in place at all, that exact same phenomena would occur through flex credits. So to state in a meeting of this nature a concept that we have just established through data that BMP farms do not show equivalent conservation, it's actually a falsehood because they actually have more conservation because they have more conservation-intensive infrastructure in place. They grow crops with less units of water than normal base program farms do.
So our definition of conservation here under the management plans is reductions and withdrawals of groundwater. I did not intend to frame that there was absolute agreement on the way that we're interpreting the data, but what ADWR has seen from our analysis of this data is that there is increasing water use under the BMP program as compared to the base program.
And that, again, I vigorously disagree with because that same phenomena was occurring prior to the BMP, 100%. with flex credit purchasing. So the BMP has not caused more water to be used. All it is using is a different program. And without the BMP, the purchases of flex credits, which have been fairly dormant, will just start resuming again, and those directions will go the exact same way that they were prior. So in the concept of this being a meeting where we're actually doing discussion as opposed to this being a listening session, I think it's very, very important to understand that those in the regulated community at this point, at this meeting, are in great, great disagreement with your concept.
Understood. We did have a prior meeting to discuss that data. Mr. Riggins, I'd be glad to have a conversation with you offline to go back over that. What we're focusing on in this meeting today is going to be more the policy side of that. So I understand what you're saying. I'd be glad to follow up with you. But today, at least, we're going to focus on some proposed changes, and I'd like to get some feedback on the details of those changes rather than continuing to discuss the data portion that we have covered.
And I will do my very best to not have anything that doesn't allow you to facilitate that. But then again, to actually have these meetings and have some substance come out of them, there needs to be discussion with the regulated community, as opposed to a fiat accompli that we've already decided this and move forward, and now let's talk about the next steps. So if we're going to have discussion and something substantial come out of these meetings, there actually has to be discussion. Not just, oh, well, we agreed upon this before, when we have not. And the second thing I do emphatically wish to state, the Pinell AMA has had no meetings on this. We haven't discussed this yet. We have a different management goal. We have different concepts in the Pinell AMA. And as the GUAC and the Pinell AMA was concerned, we didn't want to see this whole thing get lumped together in a very large discourse that has no whatsoever realization of the uniqueness of where we are. And that's exactly what the department's been doing. And I'll do my very best to let you continue with what I am more and more considering to be a listening session. We come here to have a listening session with you. We don't discuss these issues. You just tell us what you've decided. But we'll let you go ahead and go forward.
So the way we're approaching the management plans work group and these individual subgroups is, yes, that we're developing these concepts on the scale of all 5 AMAs at the same time, with the intent that during that drafting process that I mentioned earlier next year, we will work to, so each AMA gets its own management plan. So throughout that drafting process, we will be working with each individual AMA to make sure that the details of those frameworks fit within the needs and within the goals of each AMA. So there is going to be a customization step, but similar to what was done in previous management plans, the general framework is what we're developing here, and the general framework is what we would mostly like to match across the AMAs, which matches with what the current management plans do, where the framework is the same across the AMAs and some of the details might differ.
And I look very much forward to substantive discussions concerning exactly how programmatic issues need to be handled. Hopefully they happen that way, and hopefully we don't continue to be in an environment to where after decisions are made by ADWR, they let us know what's going to happen. Because for the last 6 months, that's sure where the Pinell AMA has been.
So we'll go ahead and move on. We did have 2 previous meetings under this work group. As I said earlier, we are going to try to focus on what concepts we have going forward here today. As I mentioned to Mr. Riggins, if there are further questions about the data, I would be happy to have offline conversations with individuals, or if there's kind of if those conversations seem to be building and there's things that we need to come back to the full group with, I would be glad to schedule that for a future meeting.
Natalie, to that point, and I don't want to belabor this, but Patrick Bray, Arizona Farm Ranch Group, it does stem from the meeting we had over at our office, and my understanding leaving that meeting was we were going to dig into this issue offline, not necessarily as a large group, but we are going to dig into that issue, correct?
Sure. My perspective there is, with data, there's always more to be done. You can dig into the data forever, and at some point you have to move forward. We are certainly going to continue looking at that data and making sure that we're understanding it correctly, but at this point, every way we have analyzed that data has come out to the same end result, that the two programs, the base program and the BMP program, are not equivalent as they are intended to be under the statute.
So, based on the statement you just made, I become equally as frustrated as Mr. Riggins that the department stands by its analysis, and that's final. We can have all the discussion we want, but as far as you see it, the BMP program uses more water than the base program. End of story.
I am open to seeing other data, analyzing other data. We certainly continually interpret those things, but at this point, we don't have additional data to point us in a different direction.
Scott Riggins.
Sorry, Scott, I have something.
If I may, gentlemen, I appreciate, this is Carol Ward. I appreciate your input and your thoughts. I would like to suggest, if I may, that certainly you have significant concerns, and I would like to address those. But I also feel that we need to move on with the agenda that we have in front of us today. If we could come back to this issue, we can discuss whether we do this offline, or maybe we need to come back in the full group and have another discussion about this issue, particularly data and how we're looking at this. But I think this might merit a focused discussion rather than trying to attempt to do that just today. Yeah. Okay. Michael, thank you for your comment. What I think I'm hearing right now is that we probably need to come back and address this issue in another meeting in a public forum, and I'm seeing some heads nodding. So let us regroup as DWR and have a conversation about how we can address this with all of you and have a conversation. But if it would be all right, let's do that in a planned manner. And if we could, I think it would help to get on with the discussion that is in front of us today and address this in a more focused manner. If that works.
Natalie, one of the things that I would like to bring up is that I think that Scott has some very good points, and I have to admit, when I looked at the slide just prior to this, I felt a little flashpoint arising when I hit the word conservation, because for most of us, the term conservation means application efficiency. And to you, I think it means something else. It just means what total amount of water is being used. When you're telling us that we're not efficient, that becomes, we bow our neck and say, wait a minute. We're being as efficient as we can be. And that's one of the problems, that we see even with this fourth management period. Whenever the decision was made to reduce the water duties on that top 25%, now you're talking about real cuts. I mean, if you're already about as efficient as you can be, now you're forcing me to change the crops that I grow or not grow at all. And so that was one of the things in the drafting of the Groundwater Management Act that basically we were supposedly avoiding, so that the cropping patterns that we had established we were going to be able to go ahead and do that. But when the BMP first came about, and I remember sitting on that committee, the reason that came about was that all of a sudden the markets that we had, can you hear me, Michael? The markets that we had happened to be for plants that are year-round, like alfalfa, that take more water because they are year-round. And nobody could grow it without leaving part of their farm out. And with the BMP program, you can still be highly efficient. But maybe they did use more water, but it's a response to markets.
As someone who sat on the back bench of the Groundwater Management Act negotiations, you're correct, Mr. Rayner. The idea in Pinal County in particular, and Leroy Michael and John Kyle and Rob Moore, the first head of agribusiness, the banks were going to tell the Pinal County farmers when they were going to get out of agriculture, and then the water was going to be confirmed. That's how the water was going to be shrunk. In the meantime, the farmers were supposed to do what you just said, become more efficient in the application of water. The balance of the people around the table just wanted to cut agriculture and take the water away from agriculture for the benefit of the state. But the balance that was struck was that Pinal County was supposed to be able to pump till the banks told them they weren't going to finance the crops anymore, and the farmer was going to have to be more and more efficient in the application of water. So back to the other point is we want to be very careful that we don't lose what we won in Pinal County in the Groundwater Management Act understanding. And I think that's some of the points you're trying to raise, Mr. Riggins. But having been there, seen that, and done that, I just want to make sure we memorialize what really did happen in the negotiation of that act.
Scott Riggins, try to make it a final comment at this point in time. I would like to point out to the staff of ADWR, I can understand the desire to move on and get on with this meeting. Unfortunately, that's concurrent with the concept of moving past and leaving unworked things that need to be gotten into done. I would point out that during the negotiations for the third management plan in which the BMP became a reality, there was a BMP subcommittee that was two-thirds the size of the group in this room that met for months to come up with the features of the BMP plan that are in place now. There was a full understanding in that group that even though certain farms may use more water because of a BMP, they already were because of flex credit purchases. And indeed, it was a benefit to get the water to those farms because they were where the conservation was at the highest point. So you saved water on production as a whole through either flex credit transfers or BMPs. Both of them will transfer the water to farms that are more efficient. And the last thing I would like to say here, and it's the most important point that there is, you folks can say that this is data-driven, and you can say it as much as you want, but this isn't data-driven. This is interpretation of data-driven. This is a philosophy that you're putting forward. It's not data. There was more water used on individual farms than their base water allotments for decades prior to the BMP program. It was facilitated through flex credit transfers because of the very same reasons that I've enumerated. To say that BMPs are bad because they use more water on individual farms is an incorrect philosophical analysis. You know, you can say in data that if it takes 4 days for one ship to sail across the ocean, 4 ships can do it in 1 day. Makes sense, doesn't it? You guys are playing with definitions and philosophy. And please, don't say this is data-driven, because majority of the people that are sitting here don't agree with you at all. And our data doesn't play out the same way yours does. and I'll try to hold it at that point.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Riggins, for all your comments. And I've heard from this group very clearly and that we need to come back and have a full discussion of this issue. And I promise you, we are not going to move past it. We will come back. We will come back and we will address this. We do, however, need to move on with the agenda that we have before us today. But I promise, we will come back and have a robust discussion of this issue.
And please, the department no longer needs to say we're more than willing to have some offline discussions with individuals. Please do not say that, because that gets lost and is over, and it's a good way to squelch thought. These meetings need to be every bit as important as these, and I got news for you. They ain't going to get done in hour-and-a-half time frames either. There's a lot to be talked about here.
There is, and we will have as many meetings as we need to have to ensure that we have thorough discussion. And it's very important, and we all appreciate very much the engagement of the stakeholder community. We've very much been trying to encourage everybody to come to the table and to be here and to voice all of these concerns. It's critical for us to hear them. So thank you. We do appreciate it, and we look forward to having you here and to continuing these discussions. Very much so. And with that said, I hope we can. Honestly, we have very much heard you, and if we can, we would like to get some feedback on the concepts that Natalie has for us today, understanding that there is a long road ahead of us, and this is just the beginning. We will be getting a lot more input on these issues and many more. So can we dig in? Is that acceptable to everybody? All right. Thanks. And I will hand it back to Natalie.
So, as Carol said, we did intend this to be a beginning of the conversation. This is not something that we are handing down to the group in any sense. What we are presenting today is concepts, framework. You'll see on the slides to come that I have a whole category of things that are TBD that we'll have to work out through conversations in this group and ongoing. So with that said, we are working under a number of statutory definitions today for the management plans. I know most of you have attended several of my meetings, which means that you have heard me say the framework of the management plans is that the conservation programs should be designed to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. So that's the definition of conservation that we're working under, is that reductions of withdrawals of groundwater. The best management practices statute indicates that the BMP program should be at least equivalent to that under the base program. So with those two combined things, ADWR indicated at the last meeting that we were going to be presenting some concepts in response to that information. I understand your reservations with that statement, but we're going to go ahead and move on into the concepts that DWR has developed in response to that. So the concept here that we'll be discussing for this first, I guess we're maybe moving into the middle part of the meeting here, is tiers for the BMP points target. So the idea here is similar to the Municipal Best Management Practices program. So under the Muni BMP program, there are tiers based on the number of connections that a municipal provider has. So if you have only a few connections, then you have a lower points target. If you have a lot, then you have a higher points target. The same concept could be implemented under the Ag BMP program, but there's a lot of open questions there, which is part of what we wanted to try to discuss today. So if we were to implement something like tiers under the Ag BMP program, we would have some options of how we would go about that. One option might be basing it on acre feet per acre, some kind of a 3-year rolling average of total use, so that those who are using water most intensively might have to achieve a higher number of BMP points. Alternatively, we could base it on something like acreage. So the very largest farms have to achieve a higher number of BMP points.
And wanting to go forward, not meaning to delay the wheels of progress in any fashion whatsoever, you can certainly create a non-functioning BMP program, which is looking to me exactly what you're trying to do. What I don't understand here is the Pinal AMA has already lost a third of the non-Indian ag pool. They're going to lose another third in 4 years before, by the way, the 5th management plan comes into fruition. And then 6 years after that, they're going to lose all of it. There is a great deal more regulatory water in base program allocations in the Pinal AMA than there ever will be again ability to find physical water to put into. There is going to be lots and lots of base program farms that are way underneath what their allocation is. Their base program allocation. Their water duty, exactly. Not their irrigation company allocation, but their Department of Water Resources water duty. The amount of water that's going to be able to go in, everybody that's been in this world for the last decade realizes that physical water is going away. For the department to take, again, a philosophical stance that somehow anybody can go out and start creating an enormous well field to take the place of the CAP and be able to use that on agricultural commodities to pay for that. The last 40 years has shown that's an impossibility. So going in the direction that you're going here means there's going to be a proliferation, as there was prior, to people just going back to purchasing flex credits. What does that achieve for the department? You've created a good program, or you've taken a good program that actually incentivized and made not only physical infrastructure be put in place to be among the most efficient farms in the world, but also practices that were put in place to increase that physical conservation. And by the way, there's a lot of us out here that don't agree with your definition of conservation at all.
So what we're working with is our statutory definitions and our statutory requirements. We are required to develop these conservation programs to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. And under those requirements, this is what we're here to continue to develop these concepts and make sure that it is something that is workable, feasible. That's a part of this conversation.
And I'm not sure that I agree with you that that is the statutory definition of conservation. And under current statutes, I don't know if I agree with you on that.
Scott, we're not trying to render this into a non-functioning program. I think really some of your comments are really taken. You can criticize process. You can criticize the substance of the proposals. A lot of those are under construction. That's why we're here. We're here to receive input, but you're just constantly questioning motives and like we're trying to squash something or to move past. And, you know, I can tell you just now that we're not going to agree to stop meeting with people. If people want to come come to this department and meet with certain of our staff, or to meet with me or the director, we're going to receive them. I'm not saying we can schedule everybody that wants a meeting, but we're certainly going to try. We're going to have those conversations. It's not part of some effort to squash anything. We need to receive that input. We need to hear from the people who have a stake in these outcomes. So I think we can have this discussion, have a conversation about these issues without all the dispersions and questioning of motive. A certain charitability would be desirable.
I would suggest, in response to that, if there was some indication in something that I said that made it feel that individuals shouldn't be talking to the department, I apologize that I gave that impression. However, to take very, very important issues that are regulated community-wide and suggest that they can be handled through individual discussions, to me, gets back to the concept of we are on meetings right now going past points of incredible diversion that we have not discussed. We have not had these difficult meetings to decide how this is going to absolutely go.
And it's fair to question process, Scott. That's okay. I mean,
well, we haven't had them. The Pinnell AMA hasn't had any meetings yet on this. And we have a GUAC meeting coming up soon that I'm sure is going to be another, okay, this is what we've decided to do. Here you guys go. I'm sure that that's going to be what we're going to see, because that's what these have been. We are not discussing issues. We have not. We have totally been said here that this is our definition of conservation and this is our definition of efficiency. Well, you know what? The BMP program is in fact of equivalent efficiency as the base program with flex credit transfers. It's a fact. But yet we say no, it's not. Well, that's a major problem, because you're saying that we are deemed by statute that we must go this way. Well, I disagree, and I'll stop.
We'll come back to the discussion of that data. I understand that you disagree with our interpretation of that, and we can come back to that. We can further explain the data that we do have access to and the way we've interpreted it. Perhaps with a better understanding of that data, we can move on from there. However,
last thing on it, please also include in the discussion the physical reality, absolutely unquestionable reality of the great reduction in physical water that can be delivered at all in the Pinnell AMA. We have everybody that's down there farming sure understands it, but you folks don't talk about that. It's part of what's going on here, but we're not talking about it.
Understood. So again, we are going to, so what we're trying to do is establish frameworks, broad concepts here, and then we'll move into creating details and customizing things for each AMA further down the line under the concepts that we develop through this group. So what I would like to do through these conversations through the rest of the meeting today is get some specific feedback on what we have here, on whether there's a better path that could go here, if there's some reasons why something like a tiered framework might not work. We would want to hear that type of feedback. Or if there's questions or additional things that we should be considering for this type of framework, or if there's different strategies that we should be taking in terms of the BMP program and how we might improve it for future management plans.
Before you... The direction that you were taking, the discussions then that may be occurring in a forum like this on these concepts are not going to drive the particularized focuses on particular AMAs. In other words, the template that comes out of these generic discussions of the broad concepts that we decided are not going to be imposed on the now, for instance, AMA discussions, which will be sui generis. In other words, when we get to a Pinal AMA discussion, we're not going to be burdened by any 1, 2, 3, 5 conclusions that have been made on some of these other things. 1, 2, 3, 5 conclusion, by the way, is a foregone conclusion.
So the general strategy that has been taken in the past is that the framework is developed for all 5 AMAs, and then that kind of overarching framework, the general concepts, the strategy, is taken to each AMA, and the details there might be adjusted.
Okay. So it's a flexible framework that's brought to each AMA, right, not a foregone framework.
But and maybe for future reference, and you don't have to delve in, but you can give us the reference. You keep talking about your definition of conservation, but 45.561 doesn't have your definition of conservation in it. So can you point to where that is?
So what I don't think I have the exact reference in this presentation. What I'm referring to is the statutes related to the management plans, which indicate that the conservation programs should be designed to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. So that's the framework for conservation that we are working under for the management plan.
So there isn't a definition.
That's what we're using as our kind of working definition here, because that is the indication of how we need to design the conservation program.
The philosophical definition.
Are there any questions about this tier concept? Does anybody have any thoughts on whether it might be best to base it on acreage or acre foot per acre, or anything with regards to those details?
If I might, it goes back with the struggle that I think a lot of us are facing. And if you go back to the very beginning of your slides, and it says, assess the current conservation strategies. And I think that somewhere in here in this process, we have blown past that and are starting to write a 5th management plan without the industry sitting around the table, evaluating what has happened, what the data is, what our mandates are, have we not met mandates over the last 4 plans, and starting at that base. I think that is the step the department has skipped with the community and has gone past that by themselves, and now you're asking us to comment on a tiered program that we have no idea how it works, and asking us to just give us yes or no answers when we have serious concerns about your definition, our definition of conservation, where we're headed, and all you want is basically for us to quit pumping.
So I understand your concerns. What we're working with here is a proposal, a conceptual framework. This is not intended to be something handed down. This is in development. That's the purpose of this group, is to develop these concepts. So if we were to go forward, the question here today is, if we were to go forward with a tiered type program, what would be the most reasonable, the best way, the most practical way to design that program?
In response to your question, analyzing the absolutely very limited concept that you have shown, I believe in light of many factors, considering a tiered program for an agricultural BMP at this point in time is a bad idea.
One of the things that I would be concerned about would be just adding complexity to a program that, to enter it in the first place, is rather complex. You have points that you have to get out of each one of those areas. One of the things that I never understood is if you put your whole farm in drip, is that just one practice? Do you even get any points in any of the other areas? I mean, so you've done the maximum you can do, but you're not qualified under the BMP. You know, I've discussed with you an idea that might achieve some of the same principles under a BMP. That were you planning to present something on that gave Natalie the idea of maybe trying to allow farms to combine irrigation grandfathered rights if you have a number of them on your farm entity, that you could do a farmer amalgamation of those rights, and you'd have the water duties on each of those, but maybe even gave up a 5% or something for the whole deal that you can show that you're conserving, but that way you wouldn't have to pay for moving credits and buying and moving credits, that you could do it within your own farming operation. It's something to simplify it rather than making it more complex, and I'm a little bit afraid that that's what this would do. I'm afraid it might make the BMP program unworkable if you added a lot of complexity to it.
So perhaps to Ron's point, we can go ahead and move on to that second concept and discuss exactly what Ron is bringing up here. So we do have a provision under the statute that allows us to create an alternative agricultural conservation program. So to come up with something brand new, something that has not been in the management plans, and something that's not specifically lined out in the statute. So, but again, with the same phrasing as under the BMP program, where it says that it should be at least equivalent to the base program. So the concept here that Ron brought to our attention that he was just talking about is so it would allow multiple IGFRs under the same owner, operator, to potentially combine those allotments. There is a similar concept to this in the turf program, where contiguous facilities are allowed to combine their allotments and report together. So we can, again, so kind of just demonstrating that there's not really a lot of new ideas out there. There's this kind of thing can be transferred in from other programs. So, and then the kind of trade-off there in the context of the management plans and reducing withdrawals of groundwater would be that there would be kind of a cut to those total allotments, those combined allotments. I think you came up with the phrase "a cut to the aquifer," which I liked, of some percentage that would be yet to be determined. I think Ron threw out of 5. We've talked about 10 or 15. So. Again, a conceptual thing, not a lot of details here, because we wanted to discuss these things in concept with you all and have feedback on how it was that we decided and made decisions on the details of this type of program.
If I may on that. One thing I see in this is a little bit of redundancy over what is already possible. If a person controls a number of farms and has the ability to actually combine them in a program like this, that same operator has absolute ability to transfer flex credits without having to buy them at the same time.
No, only if you own the ground.
If you are renting the ground and your landlord agrees to allow you to go into a system like this, then the ability to transfer flex credits should be fairly easy to get done too.
At $250 each time.
Well, you've got some tougher landlords, I guess. I have not seen that to be the case. But in this, the one thing I would be concerned about, if this is truly simply another alternative system, fine. There might be some people that find that they can use this. However, I would be very concerned if aspects of this started diminishing the ability to have a functioning BMP program. So that given as a discussion point on this potential alternative conservation program.
And the intent here is not, again, to diminish the BMP program. The BMP program is required under the statutes to be included in the management plan. So that program will be continuing into the 5th management plan. This is just a potential alternative in response to concerns that Ron raised and that we've heard from other water users in the regulated community. So this is something that we wanted to discuss and further develop kind of in response to some of those concerns, and something we've heard is a burden on the agricultural community. So are there any questions before so some of the things we would need to determine kind of in fleshing out the details of this type of program would be, what kind of geographic constraints do we put on this? Would the IGFRs have to be contiguous? Would it be okay for them to be in the same district? What types of limitations would we want to put on there? Additionally, as Ron mentioned, we would have to determine what that exact cut to the aquifer percentage would be throughout these conversations, and as well as how flex credits would be managed across those IGFRs. If it's just a proportional thing to the individual IGFRs, that might be a simple thing, but we would just have to have that discussion.
Yeah, because I knew that they would see immediately that, if you had properties that had large numbers of historic flex credits, does that make them available then to be moved where under the current program you can't move them after they're more than the second year. Well, they're not available for sale, so you can't move them.
So the department is contemplating the ability to move historic flex credits that aren't?
No, that's why they're saying it's up for discussion.
Okay.
I think some percentage would be reasonable.
One thing I would point out in the discussion between crafting such a concept as this, there are irrigation grandfathered rights that I know of that have up to 3 different providers of irrigation water within the same right. So as you're contemplating the complexities that may be in there, that certainly throws some to it.
So would that, just to help me understand that a little bit, would that be someone within a district, or is that outside of a district, or how does that work?
It doesn't so much happen in the large Phoenix AMA districts. In fact, probably very few of them. But in the Pinal AMA, there are irrigation rights that sometimes have 2 or even 3 different irrigation districts, and then plus a portion of it is independent well. So you have all sorts of things within one IGFR.
Scott, here, my idea was, could you combine a number of IGFRs just in a fairly localized area? We have 35 because it's an area that's rapidly developing. A lot of them are smaller pieces. And so to, file reports on each one of those, but for you to be able to even give yourself some flexibility by leaving one of them out, and you can use the irrigation right inside the same districts over on another piece of ground, but really you can't use the water duty on another piece of ground without taking the credit, doing a credit and moving it over. So if you could combine them in a way that you have a number of rights that make sense to put them together, you'd only be filing on one, but let the department have a way of calculating the combination of those rights, how many acre feet were you allowed to use in that thing, and it would be worth it to me to give up a little bit of water to be able to do that. At least it may give you the ability to be more efficient in where you do use it, rather than irrigating a piece that maybe just as soon not.
I think the concept, as I understand it, is yes, there's a little bit of trade-off in that cut to the aquifer percentage, but largely the benefit here is kind of on the administrative burden side, where
these same pieces, I tried to figure out a way to put some of them in a BMP, and especially with the new rules for the fourth plan, it'd be impossible. There's no way it'd fit under BMP.
Ron, I would, again, I understand what you're saying. I don't know how many operators would find this superior to a BMP approach.
Yeah, and probably not. If you have a piece of owned property that's all under one IGFR, it's no big deal. It wouldn't help you at all.
Of course, one of the things I see in this instantly is it's interesting how in this approach, it seems like the department is okay with the concept of certain pieces of land now will use more water than their water duty, but they consider that to be absolute anathema if it's done through a BMP. So that's an interesting concept because it's the same. If you do this, there will be individual IGFRs that use more than their water duty, just the same as a BMP.
So both in this case and under the BMP program, we're looking at things on the aggregate, on trends. So we look at the AMA scale. Under this theoretical program, we believe that since there's that small cut to the aquifer, that total water use as compared to the base program would be at least equivalent at the AMA scale. That's also what we're looking for under the BMP program, not on the parcel or right level scale. We're looking at the AMA scale for those broader trends of equivalency. So does anybody have any additional questions or any additional feedback on any of the items that we kind of still need to determine here? Any strategies that we might take with regard to this program?
Just an idea.
At least in the Maggie's bringing you a microphone.
Illustration might be helpful.
Okay.
Development of an illustration. A picture is worth 1,000 words.
Under this provision that started talking about a while ago, with so many rights, if you've got I can think in one area, I think we have 8 rights. Actually, they're all owned by the same people, but I can't get them to combine them all. And so there's 4 wells that serve 8 rights. So you have to report on each one of those. You move water from and to each one of those things to try to balance them out, make it all come out. And a couple of those pieces you don't ever farm because they're really poor ground that you wouldn't ever want to put it there. But the simple thing to do would be to combine all of those rights. And so you don't have to be trying to move water between them. And I don't know if there's some way to move water, account credits, flex credits, without paying the $250 fee. I don't know about it. I mean, every time you do that, is there somebody that knows differently?
Yeah, every time you transfer flex credits, you pay $250 to ADWR.
Okay, well, I mean, so if it's a small move, it costs you money. I mean, it can add up to amount to a bunch if you're having to do a lot of transfers. So just to record one, it's $250. And because you can't move them more than a year past that time, if you've got some credits, you're not tied to that annual basis. If you need to lay something out for 3 years and you're created some credits over there so you can apply that in another location on that same farm, then you're okay. Michael, does that explain it a little better?
My comment was that if we could take from this discussion and distribute to people in districts that we represent, say, this is going to be coming down to the Pinal AMA one of these days because they're going to be dealing with the Pinal AMA in particular. It might be helpful to have somebody look at a picture and then try and do the gymnastics that you're doing once they see what you've come up with, they may have ability to apply it to their own circumstance.
Well, and
that's where the illustration can trigger innovation. An illustration could trigger more innovation in a particular area.
And it may not have as much application to Pinell because what I generally know about it, there's probably not as many small acreage development transactions taking place as there are here in the Phoenix AMA. That's tending to fragment these rights a whole lot more.
Concept worth discussing, just trying to make it easier to communicate to my constituents.
Yeah. Okay. Natalie, do you have other things? There's a couple of concepts I'd like to go into.
I would love to hear your concept.
You know, one of the things that I think that I hear from some of the frustration that's coming out of the people here is, what's our goal? What are we shooting for? I mean, how many acre feet do we have to conserve? And, you know, and conserving, we got into this fight 40 years ago, but, you know, is it conservation, or you're just talking about not using the water? I mean, flat not using it. As I mentioned a while ago, conservation to me is efficiency. And that's how most of us think about it, I think, is it's conservation is efficiency, but we're talking about something entirely different than efficiency. And the thing that I think is missing out of this equation, I mean, one, we need to see what the goal is. How many acre feet do you think the fifth management plan is looking for from agriculture? Then, the next point then is, we need to look at, especially, I have most familiar with Phoenix AMA, what are the total number of acre feet of rights that have been extinguished? How much have we already contributed toward that goal? I mean, agricultural irrigation rights have been extinguished. The ones that we farm, there's been 900 acres, I know for sure, have been extinguished in the last 2 years. Is there credit to the category? You know, have we already met our conservation requirement? If that's what conservation is, we're not talking about efficiency anymore, apparently. We're talking about agriculture's use of water, total. And so, in the Phoenix AMA, it's declined, and we're less than 50% now, I understand, of the water used in the AMA. And we've seen rapid urbanization. So, is there any need to tinker with it at all?
So, the management plans were intended to be incremental, with all sectors contributing toward the goal, whether that be safe yield or a different goal in the Pinell AMA. So the idea here is not necessarily a quantitative one, but rather that we are finding the areas in each sector, agriculture included, where we can find some additional conservation, some additional reductions in withdrawals of groundwater in order to move us closer to those goals. So the Phoenix AMA is not at safe yield yet, so we're looking for additional steps, additional reductions in withdrawals of groundwater in order to get us closer to that goal of safe yield. We don't necessarily have a quantitative target there because we want to be flexible and we want to make sure that what we are finding here is something that is practical, that is reasonable, that is workable for the individual sectors.
But you know, I haven't seen any numbers recently about what the conversion of ag lands to urban uses have contributed to the goals of the AMA. And we know that it does. And one of the things that I think may be missing from our recommendations is, what are the incentives for any developer to do a conversion rather than create a new use for water? What are the incentives? There was, when we first put the Groundwater Management Act in place, there was a 3 acre-foot conversion right to an urban use, M&I use. And what happened to that 3 acre-foot? You already heard me give this speech a couple of weeks ago. It's gone, at least as it in regards to residential use. You can't do that anymore because the assured water supply rules negated the ability to do that. So all of a sudden, now we have an incentive. If desert land is cheaper than irrigated land, the developer has every incentive in the world to go build the Verado or the Estrella Mountain Ranch or any of these others that never had a drop of water used on that land before. They can buy that land for less money, and they go out and develop it, and presto, they join the CAGRD, and they create a new use for water in the Phoenix AMA instead of converting one. And it seems like that there's no credit being given. Quite a few years ago, I remember being on part of the team that we at least created an extinguishment credit process by which these water companies, at least if they're extinguishing an irrigation grandfathered right, at least they get replenishment credits for that, so they don't have to go out and buy CAP credits. What is the status of that conversion incentive right now? I don't even know what's going on with extinguishment credits because I knew they had a life to a certain time, but is there any incentive tied to the extinguishment credit anymore?
So I certainly am not an expert on extinguishment credits, so I'm not even going to attempt to touch on that. What I would like to say, though, is that some of that is kind of outside of the scope of what the management plans can do. So yes, there have been contributions from the agricultural sector, from the other sectors as well over time toward the goals of Safe Yield or toward the goal of the Pinal AMA. And what we're looking for now is to continue moving towards those goals. So we're looking for contributions from all 3 sectors to continue that progress that we have made in the past. And Carol, just a side comment, was making a point to me about the post-2025 group. Do you want to?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say I really appreciate some of these comments you're making, Ron, and I think some of this would be great to hear in the post-2025 AMA's conversation. You know, some of these larger concepts of how are we going to look at things moving beyond 2025. You know, how do we want to approach the management plans and our policies and our strategies as we look forward to the future? You know, I hope that you and all of our stakeholders, and particularly the agricultural stakeholders, will be active in that group. You know, I think we've had more municipal representatives at that stakeholder group. It is really imperative to have the agricultural and the industrial stakeholders involved in that group as well. Those are really important discussions for the future that we'll be having in that group, building the strategies as we're looking forward to the future of water management within the AMAs. So I really encourage everyone to be engaged in that as well. But obviously what we have to focus on here within the 5th management plan process is getting these plans done for this 5th management plan period, and then start digging into these really big, weighty future discussions as well. So look forward to that.
I can appreciate that, but I do wonder though if there aren't some things in the regulatory arena. I mean, the assured water supply rules were just that. So are there some regulatory things that can be done, as long as...
Yeah, that's absolutely what we'll be talking about in 2025.
Create new uses every day. We're sitting here trying to squeeze down. One of the things that most farmers fear is that you wind up with a farm, but you can't farm it, or you can't farm what is most likely to make you some money. And when you get to that point, you have to quit.
So I understand your point about some of these other concepts, about some of the assured water supply rules. What we're kind of focusing on here is within the scope of the management plans and those conservation programs. The assured water supplies, the assured water supply rules are not under that same authority. And David has joined us at the table. Thank you, David. David McKay is our assured water supply manager. Some of those conversations about the assured water supply rules, how we might consider those to take us into the future, I think that does, to Carol's point, kind of fall more under the discussions that are happening in that post-2025 group. David, did you have something to add?
Yes, I had a couple of things. One on the extinguishment credits. Those are still an option for certificates as they look at their options for replenishment, and particularly in the Pinal and Tucson and Phoenix, AMAs, wherever we have the CAGRD. They have the option of going with CAGRD, or they have the option of using extinguishment credits. Typically on those certificates, when they use an extinguishment credit, whatever they have up front at the time the certificate is issued, then we would divide that by 100, and that's basically the replenishment for that certificate on an annual basis. For assured water supply rules, every year there's seems to be some changes in those. We've had changes in the calculations for extinguishments in Pinal AMA that just due to some stakeholder meetings that we've had over the past couple of years. So those things are always on the table, I guess you would say, in terms of how those rules are done. They're not fixed. There's also, statutes that come into play that also impact those rules that we go by. There, even here recently, there's been some legislation dropped that could impact the way our rules are written as well. So there's always opportunities, and in terms of making those changes, it's just kind of up to the stakeholders to bring those decisions to bear.
It's hard to play the game when you don't know the rules. I mean, it sounds like it's more complex than I remember.
Beth, you have a comment?
Yeah, so you're asking these concept questions kind of in a global nature across all the AMAs.
At this point, yes.
Yeah, right, understood. So at what point in time will you begin to distinguish those based on the different AMA management goals?
So as we kind of work out some of the details of what might be workable or what might not be workable for these given programs, we do want to kind of assess them as a whole at the beginning. If they could be similar across the AMAs, great. That makes things easier to understand when we try to talk about things generally. If there does need to be some customization, we'll work with the individual GUACs on that. We'll have meetings throughout our drafting process to kind of work on some of that customization process for each of the individual AMAs. Does that answer your question?
I'm supposed to confirm that's a discussion starter, not a discussion ender.
It's intended to be. This is intended to be at the beginning of the discussion. Yes. Yes.
It isn't covered in it.
Right. We will continue to develop these concepts throughout this work group, and then also throughout the drafting process as we're writing each individual AMA's plan.
If I may.
Here again.
While we're on agricultural conservation programs, there is an absolute understanding and truth in the Pinal AMA that in looking at water over 100 years,
In 10 years, we don't have any CAP deliveries anymore. Half of what we have is gone in 4, and the other half's gone in 6. If the department would be willing to actually get some agricultural economists on hire to look at things, they would find that since the enactment of the 1980 Groundwater Act in the Pinell AMA, I would have to have basic data confirm the exact number, but there certainly hasn't been more than 3, 4, 5 agricultural wells drilled in the last 40 years. Most people can't even afford to fix them, let alone drill them. Now, indeed, there is some talk of some subsidized wells because of drought relief coming into the picture. That's true. Subsidized wells work, but there'll only be so many of them. And so in light of these things that are absolute facts, I mean, they're axioms. They can't even be contested. In a data-driven world, I would think it would be very beneficial for the department to actually come up with the numbers, which they can very easily, of exactly what the irrigation grandfather right base program allotment is in the Pinell AMA. Because what we're going to find is we don't have nearly enough water to meet it anyway. There's way more base program water out there than we're going to have. The department has inserted through some of its models that well pumping is just going to absolutely go crazy when the CAP goes away. Well, I'm here to tell you something. These districts are already pumping as hard as they can. They don't have extra capacity. And you sure as heck can't grow cotton with $100 water. Go out and drill some of these $500,000 to $1 million wells and see how that works in an agricultural economy. So in data, please, while we're having these discussions, go ahead and open up and show us what the base program IGFR total allotment is. And let's see how low we are being able to meet it now, because we're way below what we can do now. And when we net out the CAP water that won't be there, wow, we're so much below what that is now. So we have people that are looking at financial failure, looking at absolute devastation, because they don't have nearly enough water to even meet what their IGFR allotments are. But yet we're sitting here in this forum trying to figure out how to give them even less. So let's get that data out. Let's have that part of the discussion, please.
We can include those total numbers as a part of the continuing data discussion that we've already mentioned. So I know we are running a little low on time here today. So what I would hope for from each of you is kind of a continuing consideration of these concepts that we've laid out here today. We would love to have some specific feedback on the concepts, on the frameworks here, on how these details may or may not work. If there is a strategy that may work within these concepts, or if there is a totally different concept that one of you has an idea for, we would love to hear that as well. We're really looking for input at this point in the process on how we might move forward with some of these concepts or some other concepts for the 5th management plan. So I appreciate the engagement throughout this process, and we really hope to continue gathering some of that feedback both through these meetings and through other conversations we are having with the various stakeholders. So,
Natalie, to that point, those concepts that you have rolled out, does the department have more description or more information they could put to it besides those few sentences that are on the slides?
So at this point, we wanted to bring it to you all in an early stage because this is a work group, because we wanted to have a discussion with you before it got too far down the line. So no, that is what we have with regard to these at this point. So what we're looking for is over the next however many meetings we will continue to build out those concepts, assuming they are concepts that we would like to go forward with. So, yes, we'll have to continue having a data discussion, but we'd like to come back to these concepts, flesh them out a little bit more, start working through what those additional details and open questions might look like. So we'd love to hear additional feedback from you all on what those additional details might look like and how these plans might be built into kind of a workable form. I understand there's some concerns there, and I think the devil's in the details, right? So figuring out what those details need to be is kind of our next big task here.
And those concepts presented today are intended to only add to the current BMP program?
It is in addition, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And trying to not be too incredibly verbose, because I'm oftentimes accused of same. I would very much hope out of this meeting that in the long set of agenda plans and meetings the department has in line for us at this point in time, I would very much think that from the results of what you've heard from the regulated community in this meeting, that sometime in the not too distant future, we actually see a new meeting come into the agenda list that addresses the basic disagreements and the foundational discussions that we've avoided concerning the equivalency of BMP programs and how they fit into the regulatory scheme. I personally believe that comments on anything that is past that at this point is superfluous. That doesn't mean that I need to be agreed with, but that's my opinion. And I certainly hope to see that the input from this meeting generates dialogue that we all can get into and start solving some of these problems.
Thank you, Mr. Riggins. We have heard you, and as I said, we will have a meeting on that, and we appreciate your input. And I would like to add, we have had meetings in which we did bring up the data, and we have asked for input. So, we're not trying to dodge this issue. We're not trying to hide from it. We have brought this forward, and we are happy to do so again. So we will address it. Sorry that you missed the meeting before. We will come back to this issue. So thank you.
And thank you. I guess you've just finally got our attention.
And we're very, honestly, we really do appreciate the engagement. We very much need to have you all here, have you involved, and have your input. We are counting on this. As Natalie, has said today, these are concepts, and you're not seeing a lot of detail in these concepts because they're at their very early stages. And we are counting on all of you to help us develop them. This is a collaborative process. We have our requirements as an agency to develop these programs, and we do that with your input. We are counting on you to help us. You're the people who are out there dealing with these programs every day. You're the regulated community. We need your input. We need to work with you, and we really, truly appreciate your engagement. And thank you.
I'd like to comment that Ron Rayner and I think are the only ones who were there at the beginning.
No, Bruce was.
And we're very grateful you're still hanging in through all of this.
You silent, Bruce? He didn't scream back then. You did. You younger people may have encountered certain psycho phenomena in your life.
Talk into the microphone.
Paranoia.
Could you use the
You have
microphone,
absolutely
please?
no idea the paranoia that existed in 79 and 80.
Could you use the microphone, please,
The
for
fact
the
that we're
webinar?
resurrecting some of it is because, at least in the Pinal County area, Mr. Riggins, it's just life and death. And we thought we'd figured a way to where the the farmer could continue to become more efficient in application of water, but not go out of business until the bank told him he couldn't get financing under the current commodity pricing structure. We think we're about to lose that. That's why we're paranoid. But you outlined a process. Thank you.
One other point of data, if you can produce this, I really am curious in the Phoenix AMA what our beginning total water duty for all the IGFRs in the Phoenix AMA, what they added up to when we started, and what the active IGFRs are today, what the combined water duties for all the IGFRs today, what they look like. Just curious to compare those numbers.
Are there any other questions or comments before we wrap up today? All right. Thank you all for being here today. As Carol said, we do genuinely appreciate your participation, involvement in all of this. We are looking for feedback, and you all have a lot of that. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. We do have a number of upcoming meetings. The next agricultural subgroup that we have on the calendar is May 14th, but I will have some discussions with staff to see if there's an additional data time that we can get on there. Our next full work group meeting is on March 19th, and we also have a municipal subgroup meeting ahead of that full work group meeting on the 9th, which is next Monday. So all of these meeting dates are posted online on our public meetings calendar. We do have a fifth management plans page, on our website where all of our meeting information and presentation slides and all of that are posted. And we hope to see you soon at some future meetings. Thank you again all for being here, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Natalie?
Yes.
MPWG.
Management plans work.
Management plan. Thank you. Okay, I apologize.